All right, we are now streaming live on Facebook.
Okay.
So, hello, welcome to Rita. I'm really happy to have you in my lineup. Of course, you've been on my short list for a while now. We've had to kind of work with schedules and stuff to get you on. So I just want to introduce everybody to Rita Dragonette, who is the author of this amazing book, The 14th of September. And I'll let Rita tell you a little bit about it. But this is a story, a coming of age story, coming of conscience story about the Vietnam War told from a female perspective. So it's really, really a great, I mean, the Vietnam War, of course, is a topic that, people are going to gravitate toward no matter what. But this is a really nice perspective, a fresh perspective on it. So Rita is now working on her second novel. And as we talked briefly about, she's in revision hell. So that's her story this week and for many weeks, I think for now, it's been going on for many weeks. So yeah, what's revision hell like, Rita? Can you tell us a little bit about your new book, kind of how you got the idea for it? And then what is it like to be so deeply into like one draft and then a next draft and then another draft? And, is there a light at the end of the tunnel at this point?
Well, actually, my skin is prickling as you say that. When you say one draft and another draft and another. Well, let's start out with, let me tell you about the book itself. The preface,
Okay.
as you said, was, it is fiction as well, but it was based on things that actually happened. So it still had a little bit of a roadmap for what it would be. And this particular book, I started with, which is probably how most fiction writers start. I started with nothing, and I just started with kind of a lifelong infatuation with Ernest Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises. I just really felt like he had captured a generation. Remember, it was all about the lost generation, people looking for meaning between the wars, and also full fighting fiesta way of life, those kinds of things. And I'd always been fascinated by it. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I went to Paris with a friend of mine who was from Quebec. And of course, I took her to Sylvia Beach's bookstore, which is where all of the writers in the 20s, including Hemingway, hung out. And I'm sitting here talking about this book, and she has no idea what I'm talking about. And I said, I can't believe you've never read Ernest Hemingway. Well, of course not. She's from Quebec. She read other people that were Canadian writers and in French. So I bought her that book. And then when I came home from that trip, I was on the massage table and I thought, there's just something about your head. I don't know if you have that. I get ideas when I'm drying my hair and when I shower. So there's got to be.
Shower, yeah.
So this was a massage table, and I suddenly went, oh, I could update The Sun Also Rises with a version of it for the generation that I started talking about in the 14th of September that is now much older and moving into a different phase. And that's where I came up with the idea for what I'm now calling Last Sunset in San Miguel. And it is about older expats. Sun Also Rises were younger expats. They were in their early 30s. My book is older expats who have come to the new expat capital of the world. It's not Paris, it's actually San Miguel Today, Mexico, full of expats. And they have come to this magical city where everything is going to be working out beautifully. It's very dreamlike.
Let me ask you one question first. Is that part real? Is that really a place where expats go, or is that fictionalized as well?
I did not make up. It's hard to make up geography.
Okay.
You're going to go back to Atlantis or something. So
Yeah.
San Miguel, and that's how I got the idea, because the other thing that hit in my brain is I had a friend who went there very often, and she would talk to me about the exploits of the expats and weird things they do. So they go there, and it's inexpensive to live. It's very beautiful. They do what they've always wanted to do, but then they can't quite let go of themselves. And she talked about the fact that they will have movies in the courtyard on Thursday nights or something, and then the expats will walk over to somebody and say, you're sitting in my chair. And I just thought that was so delicious. And I thought, okay, stories of expats will be wonderful. And so last sunset in San Miguel is about a group of about five, same number of characters that are in the San Rises. Some of them are reminiscent, some of them are not. You don't have to read that book first, but they have all come to San Miguel with their last dream. And the tagline of it, the working tagline is, for a generation of dreamers, this last one really has to come through.
Ooh.
So this is what we're talking about now.
I like that.
I started this book right after I launched the first one. And at the suggestion of the writer Jacqueline Mitchell, you know her, she wrote Deep End of the Ocean, Oprah's first book club text. I started with a, like a plot summary. It was like a plot outline. So a plot outline would be more like, here's a scene, Tammy and Rita are talking about writing this book. And you don't put any more detail into it than that, but you have a really good roadmap. And that was about 5 years ago. And, COVID was in the middle. I wasn't able to write during COVID, but it was a pretty good roadmap to keep going. But it isn't anything like, that's when you're playing with the ideas and you're getting it all out, and then you fill out all your scenes over the years. But then you get to the end of the manuscript, and that's where the real work begins. And
yes.
I have been in revision hell since this time last summer, because I'd gotten all the way through the manuscript, and I wanted to get a version of it off to a person that I consider my first editor. She's a teacher. I met her at Ragdale, which is a writer's retreat, and she's just really good first time going through. And so I almost killed myself getting that to her before I went on a trip to Morocco last fall. Then I came back, I put her revisions into it, and then almost killed myself again over the holidays, trying to get it ready for my developmental editor, which, as you know, is somebody who has never seen it before, didn't look at any of the drafts, and sees it from this huge standpoint of, is this book working?
Right.
And particularly cause and effect. Does this go from this, go from this, go from this? Which, when you're coming up with the idea itself, doesn't really work. So now, after having a first editor, then I had a proofreader, copy editor before I ever got this to my developmental person. And now I am in draft 8. And draft 8 better be the penultimate draft. That's all I can say.
But if it's not, you'll keep going, right? Each time you got to tell yourself, this is it.
Exactly. And being at this draft, it really has nothing to do with beautiful sentences. It really has to do with, would this character, like one of the things I'm grappling with today, and I just figured it out while I was waiting for you to turn this on, is that she originally looked at draft 6 and said, oh, that conversation shouldn't be there. It should be way, way over here. So I put it way, way over here, wrote it through beautifully, worked it all into stuff. She's looking at draft number 7 and goes, you know what? I think it really needs to be back where it was the first time. But now it no longer is the same team, right? Because you've factored in all these things that have happened. So now I look at a previous draft, pull the old scene, looking at the new scene, and then she says, well, maybe part of it should stay where it is. So I'm like, it's really hard. It's really hard because you've been there before, and you're like, I have this all figured out now, and now I have to take it apart and put it back together.
Well, there's 2 things about what you're saying that I absolutely love that you're pointing out that, I think can be sort of a misconception with people who may be writing, their first novels, or maybe they're new to writing, is the amount of work that goes into revisions. As you've just beautifully illustrated, you're on draft 8. Now, some people don't do that many drafts. Some people do many more. But the point is, in the revision process is where you're really able to get, on the granular level and really figure out what is your message. I feel like in a first draft, most often it's just kind of notes to ourselves. It can be complete chaos. We think we know what we're writing, but it's not until it's out of us as one complete piece that you're able to look at it a little bit more objectively and start to see like, oh yeah, this is a theme that I didn't realize I wanted to come out. Now I can actually work with that. So that's huge, I think, just knowing that there's a lot of work, and it doesn't mean you're a bad writer if you're stuck in revisions or if you're spending a ton of time in revisions. It's actually, that's where the real writing happens. And then also, as you've talked about this editor, knowing that this isn't done, alone in a room. Like we think about the old masters, getting drunk in their room and just, oh, and I've said that many times, but it does take a team of, talented people to bring out a good story, because these are complicated, all encompassing, complete worlds. So I think that's a good thing to note as well, is that having help is, again, doesn't mean that you can't do it or you're not a good writer. It actually means that you know what it takes to create a good story.
Well, and I
So
think that's such an that's such an important point to get across, because I think there are people who think that if you have too much help from an editor, you're cheating. And
yes.
it's absolutely the opposite of that. And this for me is to be a novelist, a third career. And I spent the first two being in the consulting business. And I know what it's like. You hire a consultant who has different expertise to make what you need to be doing better. So I didn't have any problem with asking for help. Also, it saved you tremendous amount of time. But I was thinking about this the other day. You're having a rainstorm and we're having all these emergency alerts. And I had been watching a documentary on Faye Dunaway, of all people. Just popped up.
Oh, I saw that was out. Yeah, I wanted to see that.
But I was thinking of it in between all of these storm alerts, and she's talking about working with these great directors side by side and taking a script apart and taking her part apart and putting it back together again. That's basically what happens in the revision process.
Right.
That's not cheating. Nobody would say, oh, that screenplay was completely changed by the director and sent a good screenplay. It's not a good story. Or that performance is based upon that director only. It's part of the process.
Right.
So, and then little things come up, like one thing that just came up this morning. One of the things that she had said to me is that my minor characters don't have as much agency as my primary characters, because I'm talking about five white people from other countries who are going to Mexico. And I have Mexican characters as well. And, these days with all of the issues around appropriation, you have to be extremely careful. And I do have them sort of instinctively knowing what's going on, that other people don't know what they're doing. And suddenly I couldn't figure out what else to do with this. And suddenly this morning it was like, oh, I can make this character be the one who figures out what really happened during this tragedy. And oh, won't that make no sense anyway? And oh, by the way, that gives him more agency. So these things that come up will often solve a multifaceted problem that you have in your book.
Yeah.
And
Well, and also,
thoughtful. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And the thing with revisions too, that, well, with any book, with any kind of writing, I think there does also come a time too when we have to say, this is what I'm going to do for now. It's as good as I can do. I guess my point is, we know from what you just said, we're always learning. We're always up leveling our craft. The more we write, the more we get input, the more we share it and study writing, the more we have these moments of like, oh, I wish I had known that before, this little device I could use, or this trick, or oh, I see the sleight of hand of the author behind the scenes here. But there's so much of that. There's so much to learn. It's just this never ending thing. So I think there is also that piece of, working on a project, knowing when to finish it and to say, yeah, there's always going to be more input. I could keep revising this for the next 10 years, but at some point I'm going to have to put it out into the world, knowing that I'll probably look back someday and see things. I mean, I picked up my book the other day, and on the first page, I was like, oh God, those are unnecessary words. I should have cut those, so there's always going to be that, but it's progress, not perfection. We're always going to be getting better, hopefully, but that doesn't mean that your book can't be launched at some point.
Well, and I think but it's good to have somebody else say, yes, your baby's ready, because you keep her forever. And I think the best example I ever heard of that is, the editor, Robert Gottlieb, he edited the New Yorker for many years, and he worked with Robert Carroll on all the Lyndon Johnson books. He died about a year and a half ago, but he's most famous for editing Catch 22, which goes with Heller. And I love the story that he talked about in his book, where he said he and Heller would sit side by side and go through every line of the book together. I mean, if only we had editors do that today. Every line to make sure all the jokes worked. And he hadn't read the book in 50 years. Then he went back and read it just before he, wrote this other book. And he was really afraid he'd hate it. But there was one thing that he had argued with Heller over that he just wasn't happy about. One little part of one little scene. And he let it go. And he reads the book after 50 years and he goes, you know what? It's a good book. I have no regrets at all, except for this one little thing that I need to change. And everybody has those kinds of things. And
yes,
I will tell you pretty much, like the one I'm dealing with said, I can offer input through 3 drafts. After 3 drafts, I have nothing new to tell you. So it's
yeah.
That was pretty interesting. But now, since in my penultimate draft, I am moving things like some scenes around and having to change a big thing at the end, it's like, okay, there'll be one more after that, just to make sure that the last few things you said actually fell into place the way you wanted. But
yeah,
will get stale. Like my first editor, I worked for 7 years on my first book with the same editor. And that was really great, but I came to know that there's certain things she liked to do. She liked to start every chapter with last Thursday or Tuesday. And
wow.
also, like, how you want to punch the end of a chapter so somebody, and I would do abrupt jumps for that reason. And she would always put one more sentence in there to slow it down. So I knew what her proclivities were. So it was very interesting after your first editor to kind of get you through the hard part. It was nice to show this particular book to a developmental editor who had never seen it before.
Yeah.
You didn't know what after you start working with them, you can go, oh, they prefer this, they prefer this, they prefer that. So you get to know after 3 drafts, and you can say, okay, I agree with that, I don't agree with it. So
yeah. You don't have to take everything an editor says, I have to laugh about this because a couple of weeks ago, my editor is a younger male, of course.
A younger man.
And my character that I'm writing now is going through menopause and is having physical symptoms. And I have a descriptive paragraph about how she's feeling, like nauseated and dizzy and sort of vertigo. And he had made the note, like, I'm not really sure what's going on with her. Like, is she sick? Like, no. I think my audience will understand, this is what happens. But it was just one of those where, like, okay, that particular thread, I will have to rely on myself or, my ideal readers, because he's probably
in my first not going to get 3 girls talking in a dorm room. Well, you can imagine what that's like. And when I was at the University of Chicago, which is when I originally put it together, there was a man who put down here and said, they are just babbling, and they are just girls.
That's what we do.
This is and yeah, it's very interesting, very interesting. But after a number of drafts, you do get your confidence about what you will and won't change. And I don't know about you, but my draft now is multicolored. So what I've always done is when there's something that I know isn't right or I want to come back to or whatever, I put it in red. Now I also put things that she's recommending that I am not quite sure I agree with. I have in green.
Okay. See, I don't use colors. I use TK, which means to come. So if I have a hole or something that I know I need to go back and work on, I just put capital TK and then I can search those and go through and fix them. Or I also use CBB, which means could be better. And then I search those. And I know that I go back and make it better.
not genius yet, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but the colors help me because this being my 10th in the draft, I don't want to have any red left.
Yeah.
By the time that I get through this version, no red can be there. And then
Right.
every time I go through the green, it's sort of like, usually I go ahead and say, yeah, that she's probably right about that, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there'll be a couple of other things, like for example, my opening scene in Last Sunset in San Miguel is at a bullfight, you know, which also is consistent with Sun Also Rises. There's a bullfight at the
Yeah.
end. And I went through, I actually have a bullfight expert that I dealt with to make sure that
Wow.
everything was correct. And somebody who actually trained as a bullfighter. And so there are certain things that, for example, the editor pointed out, you don't need that. And I know I need that in there because there's a fine line that if anyone did know anything about it, I would see immediately.
For that book club of bullfighters who's going to be reading it and inviting you to come and
so
speak.
many of them. There's so
I
many.
know, right?
You know, this is an
Yeah.
interesting topic too, I think, because a lot of people are like, you know, having written a book about Vietnam, which actually that word is off-putting to a large amount of readers. They just, you know, we have a bad association with that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Same thing with bullfighting. And I'm opening with a bullfight and they're like, oh, I can't read a book about bullfighting. Well, it's not about bullfighting. You know, it's
Right. Yeah. But yeah.
and there's a thematic tie into it. So you're sort of like, you know, oh my God, I thought I was going to be doing a non-controversial book for the first. By the way, what's very interesting, backing up on the first book, this is just a little tidbit, is that my book has been out for 5.5 years for the 14th of September, the one about Vietnam. It's got a second life now because Kristen Hanna wrote the women. And been on the New York Times bestseller list, I think, for 21 weeks. And
Wow.
is about, my book is about a nursing student who is in school on a military scholarship and is doubting herself and her future based upon how badly the war is happening. You know, 69-70 draft lottery, Kent State. And she's conflicted, which is why I call it a coming of conscience book. Kristen Hanna's book is about somebody who is a nurse and goes to Vietnam and has actually experience there and does start doubting towards the end because it takes place a little earlier in the war and it's a little older character. Now it goes on to cover other topics as well, but she's kind of made that topic a little more user friendly, you know?
Yeah.
Like, oh,
That's great.
it's not going to be a bad thing, you know? So it's kind of had a little bit of a second life because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. Well, I'm excited about your new one as well. I'm glad you mentioned that about the bullfighting because I can see how I would think, oh, yeah, that's not something I'm interested in. However, I do love the idea of it being a theme. You know, and the other things that you mentioned with the expats and everything sounds fascinating. I also, well, maybe it was from you I heard this, but I think it was a second person as well, was telling me how what a wonderful place San Miguel is to visit. And I thought, that might be some place to put on the bucket list, you know,
Well,
to
and the
go
reason I ended
see.
up calling, two things you just said, I kind of revert back to what I was originally going to call the book. And it was going to be called La Cadencia. And Cadencia is the place in the ring where the bull feels safe. And the bull won. The bull thinks he's won and he's in control. We know the bull is going to die. But the bull lives the best part of his life in those 2 seconds when he's off to the side of the ring with his friends. He turns around and snorts like the banderilleros and everybody else. It's like, I got that. And that is the period of life I am talking about for these expats. They have gone through, they're in the last third or whatever, they've done all this stuff, and this is going to be what I have always wanted to do. And I'm going to go to the magical city of San Miguel city of second acts, third acts, fourth acts. Everyone there is a potter or a writer or an artist. And they're all doing what their fantasy always was. I always
Yeah.
do that. And they are going to be looking at that period of life, their Florencia, what are they going to be doing with it?
Oh, I love that.
And that's the thing, which is why I desperately wanted to call it that. But as any publisher will tell you, if you have an English language book with a foreign word as the title that people don't immediately understand, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Sunset in San Miguel came out of, as I know you know, that in my newsletter, I asked all my readers of the newsletter, I said, help me come up with an English language version of La Cadencia. And that's where we came up with Last Sunset, which gives you a time frame. We're coming to the end. Last Sunset in San Miguel, because
That's great.
sunset is also the cadencia of the day. It's the end. It's towards the very end, but it is the most beautiful part of the sky. You know,
Wow.
it's really showing them.
Yeah.
So now you see why the bullfight is really important to get in there.
Well, and I also see, I think it's great to just let people hear this, see this glimpse behind even the thought and the effort that goes into the title and how many meanings and how it plugs into this. Just like we were talking about revisions, that's your time to really look at every sentence, every word. What is it actually saying? What is it hinting at? What's the subtext? I mean, it's not just a sentence to get you to the next one. You know, everything matters. And you're illustrating that beautifully by talking about the title and how important that is and all of the things you want it to convey. So awesome.
Well, and
This is good.
it sounds like so much fun, and it is. You know, we all know when things are going well, writing is spectacularly fun. You know,
Right. I know. Yeah.
but when you're in the revision process, you know, you can take 6 hours to do a paragraph.
Yeah.
And then you're worn out for the day.
Right. But then you also do have that sense of accomplishment, right? So it's, I mean, fun, you know, it's a different kind of, for me, like
Really hard.
satisfaction, very deep and sort of very grounding and very just like you're in sort of this calm, like I did it, you know, it's, yeah, you know, but,
I call it singing, you know, so it's like when you're on a roll and you're like, yeah, I know this goes here and that goes there and boom, boom, boom.
yeah.
And it's all what I say is singing. When it's singing,
Yeah.
it's great. And then there'll be the next time when you go there, it might be singing, it might not be singing, it might be
Exactly.
a lot to get it to sing.
Right. Right.
It takes so long. So I am
All right.
on revision page 72 and the
All right.
256 pages.
Oh my gosh. Well, we will let you get back to your, we were not going to call it revision hell anymore. We're going to say, let's get back to your necessary and wonderfully satisfying revision process.
Get back to singing. I'll get back to singing.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to talk to you, and we'll have another conversation again, I'm sure, sometime about one of the many other topics that we could cover.
There we go. Okay. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and I will link to your book underneath too so people can check it out. And yeah, have a good one. We'll talk soon. I'll see you before too long.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye, Rita.